Welcome to the U3 Media Podcast, where our mission is to unite the world through coffee. I'm Christy Ross, and joining us today is Nadine Rasch, founder and director of Primavera Green Coffee. Welcome, Nadine. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I want to provide a little bit of background on you. You were born and raised in Guatemala and spent time on your family's coffee farm. You did your college education in the US and England, focusing on finance nonetheless. While in school, you traded coffee derivatives, and I like highlighting that because trading derivatives is my background. But you did this for Starbucks as well as for a futures trading firm, and you also worked for a hedge fund as an analyst. So while you grew up around coffee, your field of study and career path were in finance. I gotta ask, what was the spark for the shift from finance to returning to your family roots in coffee?
Yeah, so as you said, I grew up in Guatemala, going to our family farm on the weekends, and I don't know, growing up, you don't want to do what your parents do, so I was like, I'm never gonna be in coffee ever. Like that's never gonna happen. And I did travel a lot with my father because he was going to a lot of trade shows. And I remember very clearly being in London one time and seeing a very fancy lady come out of a bank, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I was 10 at the time, and I was like, this sounds great. Like, I'm gonna work in a very nice office, and yeah, just finance really caught my eye. I've always been interested in understanding how businesses work, and so it made sense for me at the time. And so I studied finance, worked, as you said, in the various I did various internships and then worked at the hedge fund, and it was while working there that I realized it was not necessarily what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I was known as coffee girl at the hedge fund, not in a bad way, but because I was the only person that had seen a coffee tree, and really understood the product that we were working with, or at least I thought I did then. This was maybe 15 years ago. Of course, now I look back on it and I'm like, oh my God, I knew nothing. So it's
You knew more than everybody else around you. Yeah.
Around me. So yeah. So I didn't want to stick around in that industry. It didn't make sense to me. As you mentioned, I went to university in California and at a Jesuit school. So there was a lot of sensibility around justice and sustainability, and so it didn't make sense to me that people that had never seen a coffee tree had the power to change up or down the price of coffee just based on their study of the market. Sure. Really, because it didn't really make sense. I think that the futures market had great potential until obviously more people were interested in playing the volatility side of it rather than what it was initially intended for, which is the protection and the guarantee of a price at a future date. And so that's when I started to realize that it's not really what I want to do, but I wasn't ready to go back home. I was living in London at the time, and it was when the coffee shops started to open and roasteries, and there was people naming the farms, and I was like, this is interesting. I've been to this farm, I know this producer, and I was like, maybe I could do this, but focus on smaller producers and making a difference to all the families that grow coffee, starting with my own and our neighbors. And that's kind of how I got the idea and how it all started. We wanted to focus on quality because it was the only way I saw that we could ask for a higher price is if we were delivering a product that was of higher quality. And to this day, that still stands true. And we hope that one day all the coffee producers will get paid more because there is a lot involved in growing and producing coffee.
Right. And I've learned so much just even over the last year. So I spent a majority of my career in finance, and
Uh-huh.
so coffee is newer to me, but I dove in with both feet and I love every aspect of it. But you're spot on. It really, we need to increase the economics around the producer and everything that they're doing. So I want to ask you, Nadine. I saw that you also worked in shipping, importing, exporting for a bit. So when you jumped out of finance, and you were thinking about coffee and focusing on that, talk about sort of what you did in the interim there, and then also how that helped you in starting or running your own business.
A lot of these were internships. It wasn't really like much experience, to be honest. When I started,
Mhm.
I knew very little. I was very enthusiastic, and I had worked. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My father has many businesses, and so I've always had that mindset, or maybe it was just ingrained in me, and there was no other way, I guess.
Mhm.
And so I worked with him in. He produced a lot of fruits, and so I worked in the shipping side of that, especially in bringing in the the fruits into Florida in the U.S. Um, but it wasn't for a very long time. As I mentioned, it was a few internships. But when I started the coffee uh,
Yeah.
journey, it was from scratch, and I really had to learn as I went. It
Sure.
was truly, building the plane as you're flying,
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah, exactly. Well,
Uh-huh.
and everything, even if you're just exposed to it for a short amount of time, sometimes it helps you connect the dots later
Hmm.
when you run into a similar situation. But so let's talk about the early days of Primavera. What
Hmm.
was the original mission behind Primavera Coffee? And you talked about it a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Uh, but where were you first located, and what were some of those first steps that you took to actually launch Primavera?
Yeah, so the first thing that I did, this was in London back in 2012. As I mentioned, I started to see the trends of people having on their menus not only the different coffee beverages, but also where the coffee came from, more like a wine menu. And that I found very interesting, and I could see that we could add an advantage being from a producing country but understanding the consuming side as well. And so, but the idea always goes back to making sure that the producer is the center of attention in this supply chain, and that they're more recognized for the work that they do, both economically as well as socially and personally. So it's really about lifting the producer up.
Right. Yeah. Well, then came La Central de Cafe
Uh-huh.
in Guatemala, right? A few years
Yes.
later. So talk about
Yes.
the reasoning behind starting that sister company.
Yes. So initially, I was working with exporters that would help me get the coffee from these producers over to Europe. And I was still based over there, but I came to Guatemala during the harvest season to choose the coffees that we were going to buy, and the producers that we were going to work with. And while I was establishing good relationships with roasters, with coffee buyers, and then the next logical step was for me to move back to Guatemala. Once I had established a name for the company, as well as recognition around roasters, that we had a quality product that had a good story. And this is certainly something that I learned in while I was working in fruit. And as you say, maybe it wasn't for a long period of time, but this was an idea that really got my attention. Is that my father used to grow the fruits, export as well as import, and distribute directly to the supermarket. So it was really from farm to table. And keeping in mind that this is a trend now, but this was 15 years ago. And uh, what I realized is that with all the smaller roasters, we needed to have a way to be completely vertically integrated. So we are the only in between person between the roaster and the producer. And so that was very, very key to me. And so I moved back to Guatemala. We opened La Central de Café, which is our exporting company. We have a milling facility, which is very important in order to process and export coffee. And, that was back in 2016. And since then, we've opened various warehouses around the country in order to have closer access to smaller producers and ensure that the process is as transparent and as clear as possible for all the microlots that we export.
Yeah, that all makes sense. So are there any childhood memories or experiences in Guatemala that sort of really drew you back in?
That's a picture of myself and my dad in our coffee farm while it was flowering.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
So yes, of course, the business side made sense, but I had been away for many years because I left. I also went to boarding school in the States, and so I left when I was 15, and I just thought it was time to come back. And the idea was also to start doing, being closer to the source, to the producers, and start doing different projects with producers. And so that's where I felt more connected, and I was like, this makes so much sense. This is where I need to be. It's really where we had the exponential growth as well.
Sure. Well, and you mentioned doing different projects with the producers. Like, is there one particular project that that's maybe near and dear to your heart?
There's a few, but one that is my favorite, and I think roasters have really appreciated this, is we work closely with the Chain Collaborative, which is a nonprofit in the US that helps communities in coffee growing areas, and with them and with the help of roaster partners and our donations, we were wondering what kind of projects would be interesting in. And we said, a nursery, organic fertilizer. And they came up with, that they wanted chickens. And we were like, chickens, okay. And it makes sense because it's a constant stream of income. And we were like, okay, let's do it. And a few months later, there was a big project with over 300 chickens that lay eggs, and they sell eggs, on a daily basis to local communities. It just ticked a lot of boxes because then we have a lot of issues with malnutrition in rural communities, and maybe they didn't have even access to fresh eggs. So this has ticked a lot of boxes for me, and it's just such a joy to see the first egg that they had, and all the hens and all the pictures. It's just really wonderful, and it has nothing to do with coffee, and I never expected to be doing this sort of thing, but it goes to show how interconnected everything is in the lives and culture of coffee in a country like Guatemala.
Right. And as you talk about it, sort of checks all the boxes on what they needed. But I think one of the most important things is that you listened to what their needs were versus assuming you knew where that money needed to go, right?
Exactly.
So that in particular is something I think is fabulous. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Primavera Green Coffee. So you combined your two companies under one branding.
Yes.
Any company that goes through rebranding, I mean, there are definitely challenges in executing that.
Yes.
So was it just that this was a fairly natural thing to do at this point, or what was your rationale behind the rebranding?
Yes. So for 10 years, we were only sourcing coffee from Guatemala, and our slogan was, "We're Primavera, we're Guatemala." Like it was super strongly tied to one country. But we started to get requests from roasters, if you had another origin, we would buy from you. We really like your service. We like what you're doing. And so we really had to listen to what our customers were saying, and we decided to start working in other countries. And so what we have learned in Guatemala, we can apply to certainly countries in Latin America because of the language and the culture is a little bit more similar, but we hope to expand that. And so it just naturally felt like the right moment to rebrand. We have a new logo, new colors and everything to make it seem fresh and start taking our skill set into different countries so that we can have seasonal coffees, because as you know, coffee is an agricultural product and it is best used as soon as possible. And so we wanted to have that seasonality with other options so that our roasting partners could come to us for multiple different coffees.
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense. So how many different producers do you work with overall? And I guess I should even say how many different countries, because it's not necessarily one producer per country, right?
Exactly. So we early on we decided we didn't want to have the same model that we have in Guatemala, because it like that vertical integration is very difficult to achieve, as I've learned in the past 10 years. And so we found good partners in each of these countries that we're working with. So we're currently doing Guatemala, El Salvador, and Colombia, and soon more to come. But we looked for similar values that we had, and so that we could work with other countries. Now in Guatemala, which is our biggest operation, we work with over 400 families that grow coffee throughout the country, and yeah, it has been growing and growing. Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot. So then how many employees do you have? Because that's a lot of coverage.
Yes. So I had to write this down because I didn't really know. But basically, we currently have 5 people working on the importing side and the client management side, and then 12 working here at the lab and the exporting company. And because we have a mill and we have agronomers and we have different warehouses, we have another 8 people working there. So in total is around 25.
Okay. But still, that's pretty small for how much coverage you have. So that's quite impressive. Yes, quite impressive.
Yes, we've tried to stay very lean and very cost efficient, because the most important thing is to get a quality product to the roaster, but also at a good value, but also give back to the producer as much as possible. So we're streamlining to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah. So you are a Q grader and a Q processor.
So basically it's the sommelier version in the coffee industry, where you have to take certain tests and understand the different, flavor profiles and components that make up a cup of coffee, to be able to assess quality. So that's the Q grading side. So it stands for quality grading. And the Q processing is from the same organization. They have a process on they have a course on how to process coffee. So from the cherry to the dry bean and the different methods being used there. So myself and our agronomers are all certified in this so that we can better communicate and have an industry standard when we talk to producers, as well as when we talk to roasters, so that we're using, common language.
And Q grader, certainly I'm familiar with that. I was not familiar with Q processor. So I learned something new today.
Mm-hmm. That's more, you see that more in the producing countries rather than in consuming countries.
That makes sense. So, okay, so there's several significant issues ubiquitous to every country growing coffee: labor shortages, prices, climate change, disease, pest control. So how do you, I guess I'll ask it this way: how do you approach longer term issues, balancing those priorities against the immediate needs of the community, which often take precedence? So how do you actually balance that and still stay focused on that those longer term, harder issues to solve?
So the way that we see it is the industry has to be sustainable to be long term. If it's not sustainable now, it's not going to exist in the long term. So we have to make sure that the current pressing issues are no longer pressing. So what we see and the way that we've divided, you can go on our website and download our sustainability report. And the way that we've looked at it is from 3 different pillars. So we have the environmental, the economic, and the social. Of course, with the communities that are quite marginalized that we're working with, what takes precedence is the economic sustainability. So that's one of our main drivers, is to ensure that all of our producers are economically viable, because they need to make a living in order to keep growing coffee. So we have courses on, I wouldn't say financial literacy, but certainly like cost structures, because a lot of these growers are family units and they might not hire outside labor, and many of them do not have accounting practices and therefore don't even have a real cost of production. So that was our initial step to making sure that producers were properly recognized economically, doing both a quality assessment but a cost of production assessment. And of course, every producer has a different cost of production, especially depends on how you are replanting the farm or how you're managing the farm. So it's really tied to the agriculture and the agronomers that we work with, the cost of production.
So you're working with them as partners and helping educate them, helping them put that structure in place, which is really important. I mean, you go above and beyond versus just just buying their coffee, right? Exporting their coffee.
Well, and that's why I needed to move back, because we're different to any other importer, because we're here and we are doing all this work. We don't just come during the harvest, buy the coffee, and leave the rest of the year. Right. So that's one of the key things that makes us different. Is that we're truly trying to change and ensure, and by doing that, we are ensuring that coffee is sustainable for the long term as well. So right. That goes back to your question. So that's one side, and then we have the environmental side, which is key. And we're fortunate that Guatemala has a culture of growing coffee in shaded areas. So we do not deforest in order to grow coffee. It is a crop that is intercropped with different trees, and so there is a management to it, which is very important, but we are taking steps to make sure that all of our producers meet our environmental standards. So we have water treatment tanks, even if they are artisanal. We ensure that the water that goes back into the soils is properly treated, as well as all the coffee that we buy is 100% shade grown, and we try and use as much organic fertilizer as it's possible.
Right. Well, so truly impactful on every level of what you're doing. So very impressive. I also saw that you work a lot with your producers on issues around transparency and trust and fast payments and clear communication. So how do you actually transfer that value system to your buyers of coffee?
So I think the way that we're doing that is one is via the sustainability report, and we put a lot of information and videos, and if you go to our website, we have a virtual origin trip. So if you were to come here and see every step of the chain, that is all very clearly explained in 10 videos that we made during the pandemic, because the best way to communicate this is for the roasters to come to Guatemala and to see it firsthand. And we are now back open to receiving roasters. In fact, we have people coming all through February and March, which is always an exciting period. But our most important thing is to be able to communicate that. And during the pandemic, where no one was able to travel, we decided to do it on videos, and it really shows the depth of our work.
Right.
And this is what roasters are looking for, because they also want to ensure the sustainability of the industry, as well as the traceability and the transparency that we offer is an added value to what they can offer to their consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. In my very first origin trip that I took to Costa Rica, it helped me connect the dots on really understanding. I can read everything I want to in a book, but until you see it, feel it, touch it, and see it in action, you really don't fully understand what transpires. So so I love that you do that. I have to take an origin trip down to Guatemala for sure and check it all out. But I also think it would be helpful for the end customer to watch those videos of yours,
For
because
sure.
again, I think it's a great education tool in the end. And there's a far deeper appreciation for every cup of coffee after seeing that. So,
Yeah.
so Nadine, if there is one thing you could change in the coffee industry, what would that be? That's a loaded question.
That is a loaded question. One thing. No, I would change many things. It's not an easy industry. It's very complicated. It's complex. It has a lot of cultural nuances in every country that produces coffee. Obviously, it has also a long history, maybe not a nice one. And so there's many things that I would change. I would try and stop climate change and make weather patterns more predictable as they used to be. I would make sure that all the producers know what their cost of production is, and that they have a voice in order to ask for at least having their costs met, if not obviously a higher price. The volatility in the current market is just unbearable for anyone that fully depends on coffee, and it's unfair that it's most of the coffee consumed or produced is from smallholders. So yeah, trying to educate, elevate, so many things. I can go on and on.
Yes, that's why I said it's a loaded question. I know it's really hard to pick just one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
along those same lines, though, when we talk about where you have expanded to, you have Guatemala, you have El Salvador, Colombia, but you also doing business in the U.S. and Europe and the U.K. Like those are all very different markets, on the flip side. So,
Yes.
is there something different across all of those, or something similar? Like how do you manage that? And what if you take a step back at a 30,000-foot view? How would you summarize working in all of these different countries?
So I think one of the main things is that we have a wonderful team, and they are based where their clients are based. So they definitely have that nuance that you're talking about, the difference in Europe and in the US, and so that's certainly something that drives our sales, and make sure that we can continue doing what we do. And at the same time, as I mentioned, I'm in a very fortunate position because I understand the culture here, and I try, or I do my best to understand the culture where our consuming countries lies. And so I think it's a combination of that, but in the end, everyone in the specialty coffee industry has similar goals. So even though we might be very different culturally, I believe that everyone is looking at the industry and seeing that it's something so unique and fragile and something to be cherished. We do share a lot of values, maybe not so many cultural there might be cultural differences, but the values are certainly similar.
So, okay, so what's next for you and Primavera?
What's next? So I asked myself that question when we turned 10 years, and after sourcing just from one country, as I mentioned, the next logical step was to carefully include different partners in other countries, and our goal is to have 5 different origins in the next 5 years. So we're on our way, and overall, I think just doing what we do and making sure that we do it better, that we work with more producers, that we touch more families with our work, and that we stay consistent in our quality and our client service. And yeah, and we'll see where where it takes us.
Yeah, and you've had an incredible impact all around. So I'm going to switch my questions over to a little bit more personal line of questioning.
Okay.
So do you have a life motto or simple words you live by?
I do not, but maybe it's time that I get some. Uh, life is better with a good cup of coffee. That's just always the
That's
case.
hey, that's a good life motto. That definitely fits my world too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
is there one piece of advice you'd give to someone who wants to go into coffee or start their own business?
Yes, I think coffee is a wonderful industry, and it never ceases to surprise me, and there's always something to learn. So I would highly recommend getting into the industry, because it is a beautiful industry. And then with starting your own company, um, just make sure that it's a viable business model, that you understand the economics behind it, or the finance behind the company that you're looking for.
I
Um,
totally agree. And I think that goes, I agree, that goes across all industries, right? Just understanding the unit economics behind the business you're building, because the numbers have to work or it's not
yeah,
sustainable, right?
yeah,
So, can you
exactly.
share a general coffee industry stat that you find interesting?
Yes, yes. So around 80% of the coffee production is done by 25 million smallholders. So if we look at the coffee production in general, most of it comes from smallholders. So our mission stands, strong with this statement, because we want to make sure that these smallholders have the resources needed in order to keep growing coffee.
That's an impressive stat for sure. So, along those same lines, can you share a random fun fact that most coffee consumers probably don't know?
Aha. So one tree produces around, this varies from country to country, and I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions, but around 2.5 kilos of cherry, which turns to be around 1 pound of roasted coffee. And so that's around 40 cups. So if you drink 1 cup of coffee a day, you need, personally, you need 10 trees, 10 coffee trees to supply you with the coffee you're drinking. So, make sure that your choices are, your choices matter.
That is absolutely a fascinating fact, no question. Okay, so is there something you wish coffee consumers knew about coffee farms or farmers, the producers?
Yeah, that growing coffee is complicated, and it's complex, and it has a lot of variables. And uh, we need to, I would like consumers to start looking at coffee in the way that wine is looked at, where you do want to know where it comes from, what goes into that wine, and what varietal it might be, and all these nuances, that it's not just a cup of coffee, but that there's a family, a person behind that cup.
Right, yeah. Can you share a coffee tip for coffee consumers? And what I mean by that is like on preparation of the coffee.
Yes. So I would recommend you always look at the roast date to make sure that your coffee is as fresh as possible. So I'm sure the local groceries have now, which has been wonderful to see. It has more options in terms of fresher roasted coffee. That will make a huge difference. And if you can grind it at home, even better.
That's true. That's true. That's a good tip. Okay, so I'm going to shift over to what I call the U3 top three. So very brief answers. Your favorite brewing method
A V60.
and your favorite go-to coffee drink of choice.
Just black coffee. Black
And how many
coffee.
cups of coffee do you drink per day?
One or two, but not more than that. And if I'm cupping, because during the season we taste a lot of coffee, I might not even have coffee.
Because you have plenty throughout the day.
Yes.
Yes, that
Yes.
makes sense. All right. Well, Nadine, this has been absolutely wonderful, and I'm so appreciative of your time. I want to give you an opportunity to share where someone can learn more about you and about Primavera Green Coffee.
Certainly. So you can visit our website. It's primavera.coffee, and our socials, Primavera Coffee as well. And as I said, you can download all the sustainability reports or watch the series of videos that we have created.
Well, what an inspiring story. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for helping us unite the world through coffee.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thanks to you, our followers, for joining us at U3 Coffee. We'll see you next time.